Picture a gravel driveway baking under a suffocating July sun, dust settling over a rusted 1994 John Deere tractor. Old Arthur Vance stood there, his weathered hands gripping a shovel, staring down the barrel of a polished chrome revolver. Holding it was Sheriff Thomas Miller, a man whose crisp uniform and gleaming badge masked a rot that had quietly consumed the county for over 2 decades. Miller smiled, a slow, predatory curling of his lips, and whispered words that should have broken the old man. "Nobody is coming to save you, Arthur. Around here, I am the law." But the sheriff made a fatal mistake. He looked at Arthur and saw an easy target, a frail, isolated widower with no family left to fight for him. He didn't see the tiny, blinking red light hidden beneath the rusted eaves of the old barn. He didn't know that the quiet farmer he was trying to ruin was holding a fuse that, once lit, would completely incinerate the sheriff's entire criminal empire. To understand how a routine property dispute turned into a psychological war that gripped the entire state, you have to understand Blackwood County. It was the kind of place where the geography dictated the power dynamics. Dense, suffocating pine forests bordered vast stretches of agricultural land, isolating neighbors by miles of unpaved roads. If you needed help, the flashing blue lights of a cruiser took 45 minutes to arrive, assuming they decided to come at all. And for 23 years, those lights only moved when Sheriff Thomas Miller gave the order. Miller wasn't just a corrupt cop, he was a local deity. He ran the county like a personal fiefdom. Local business owners paid an unwritten safety tax to ensure their windows didn't mysteriously shatter overnight. The town council was packed with his cousins and childhood friends. Even the local judge, an aging man named Harrison, owed his seat to a quiet campaign fund organized by Miller's deputies. If you played by Miller's rules, you survived. If you crossed him, your life savings vanished into legal fees, your property was condemned by sudden code violations, or worse, you simply found yourself pulled over on a dark county road with a broken tail light you swore was working 5 minutes ago. Then there was Arthur Vance. At 72, Arthur was a relic of a bygone era. His skin was leathered from 50 years of tending to sweet corn and alfalfa, and his spine was slightly curved from a lifetime of hard labor. After his wife, Clara, passed away 3 years prior, Arthur became a ghost in his own town. He drove his battered pickup into town once a week for supplies, spoke only when spoken to, and spent his evenings sitting on his porch, watching the shadows lengthen across his 80 acres of pristine, undeveloped valley land. It was that very land that sealed his fate. Blackwood County was changing. A massive logistics conglomerate was quietly buying up acreage along the eastern valley to build a multi-million-dollar distribution hub. The highway expansion was slated to cut directly through the heart of Arthur's property. For the developers, Arthur's farm was the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. For Sheriff Miller, who had secretly partnered with the development firm through a shell corporation registered in a neighboring state, that land represented a 7-figure retirement package. The first approach was polite. A slick attorney representing Apex Holdings offered Arthur a fraction of what the land was worth. Arthur declined without looking up from his tractor engine. "This soil raised my children and buried my wife," he told them. "It ain't for sale." When corporate money failed, the corporate suits turned to local muscle. Sheriff Miller personally drove his cruiser up Arthur's gravel driveway the following week. He didn't issue threats at first. Instead, he leaned against his hood, adjusted his aviators, and talked about how a man Arthur's age shouldn't be living out here all alone. "Accidents happen, Arthur," Miller had said, his voice dripping with artificial warmth. "A fire starts in a barn, a tractor rolls over in the ditch, a man could lay here for days before anyone notices." Arthur didn't blink. He just stared at the sheriff with pale blue eyes that had seen droughts, floods, and economic collapses. "I've survived worse than you, Thomas," Arthur said quietly. That response was the catalyst. Sheriff Miller wasn't used to hearing the word no, especially not from an old man who smelled like fertilizer and motor oil. The machinery of intimidation began to turn with terrifying speed. Within 48 hours, Arthur's peaceful existence was systematically dismantled. County inspectors arrived unannounced, citing his historic barn for dozens of fabricated structural violations, slapped a condemnation warning on his fence post, and gave him 30 days to vacate or face massive daily fines. Next came the psychological warfare. At night, headlights would pull up to the edge of Arthur's property lines. The vehicles would sit there for hours, engines idling, casting long, menacing shadows across his dark bedroom windows. When Arthur called the station to report harassment, the dispatcher, Miller's sister-in-law, told him all units were tied up on the other side of the county. But the escalation reached its peak when Arthur woke up one morning to find his water well completely contaminated. Someone had dumped gallons of industrial engine oil directly down the shaft, ruining his only source of clean water and putting his livestock in immediate danger. It was a clear, brutal message: leave or die. The sheriff thought he was playing a game of chess against a man who didn't even know the rules. He believed Arthur would pack his bags, take the insulting payout from Apex Holdings, and disappear into a state-run nursing home. But Miller's arrogance blinded him to a crucial detail about Arthur Vance's past. Long before Arthur was a farmer, long before he married Clara, he had served as a high-level systems technician in the military during the height of the Cold War. He understood logistics, he understood surveillance, and above all, he understood how to build a trap. While the sheriff's deputies were busy lurking at the edge of his property, Arthur was quietly turning his dilapidated farm into a digital fortress. He spent his nights in the cellar, stringing miles of low-voltage wire through the tree line, positioning microcameras inside rusted birdhouses, and configuring a localized server that broadcasted everything to a secure cloud network completely outside of Blackwood County's jurisdiction. Arthur wasn't trying to run. He was waiting for the sheriff to take the final step across the line. The tension in Blackwood County broke on a Tuesday afternoon when the heat index pushed past 100 degrees. Sheriff Miller, growing impatient with the corporate developers demanding updates on the land acquisition, decided it was time to end the standoff. He didn't send deputies this time, he wanted the personal satisfaction of breaking Arthur Vance himself. Two official cruisers kicked up billows of white dust as they roared down the gravel driveway, parking at an angle that effectively blocked Arthur's old pickup truck. Miller stepped out of his vehicle, his boots crunching loudly on the gravel. Beside him was Deputy Vance, no relation to Arthur, but a young, eager enforcer known for his brutal streak. They didn't approach the house with a warrant or legal paperwork. Instead, they walked straight toward the barn where Arthur was working, their hands resting casually on their utility belts. "Arthur!" Miller shouted, his voice echoing off the corrugated metal roof. "Step outside, old man. We're done playing games." Arthur emerged from the dim interior of the barn, wiping grease from his hands with a tattered rag. He looked remarkably calm for a man facing down the two most powerful, dangerous individuals in the county. He didn't retreat, he stood his ground right at the threshold of the barn door. "You're trespassing, Thomas," Arthur said, his voice flat and steady. "I believe the county zoning laws state you need a court order to be on this property after the notice you slapped on my gate." Miller laughed, a harsh, grating sound that signaled his complete contempt for the rules he was sworn to uphold. "Zoning laws? Arthur, you still don't get it, do you? I write the laws in this jurisdiction. That badge on my chest means whatever I say goes. And right now, I'm saying this farm is a public health hazard." Deputy Vance moved to the side, flanking Arthur, his eyes scanning the interior of the barn. He noticed a series of heavy-duty car batteries connected to an array of electronics sitting on a workbench deep in the shadows, but he dismissed it as the hoarding habits of an eccentric old farmer. Miller stepped closer, closing the distance until he was just inches from Arthur's face. The physical contrast was stark. The sheriff was broad-shouldered, heavily built, and radiating authority, while Arthur looked slight, withered, and fragile. It was the classic setup for a beatdown, a display of raw power meant to terrify. "Here's how this is going to play out," Miller growled, lowering his voice so it wouldn't carry if anyone happened to be passing by on the distant highway. "You're going to sign the deed transfer over to Apex Holdings by 5 o'clock today. If you don't, I'm having you arrested for resisting code enforcement, assaulting an officer. Vance here will happily provide a bruise to prove it. And we'll have this place cleared out by bulldozers before you even get your one phone call from the county jail." Arthur didn't flinch. He looked down at the sheriff's badge, then up into his eyes. You're selling out your own people for corporate money, Thomas. Your grandfather settled this valley just like mine did. He'd be ashamed to see what you've become. The mention of his family struck a nerve. Miller's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. In a flash of unbridled rage, he drew his chrome revolver from its holster, the metallic click of the hammer drawing back sounding like a gunshot in the quiet afternoon air. He pressed the cold barrel directly against Arthur's forehead. Nobody is coming to save you, Arthur. Around here, I am the law, Miller whispered, his eyes wild with the absolute certainty of his own untouchable status. It was the exact phrase, the precise moment Arthur had been preparing for. Arthur didn't shake. Instead, his gaze shifted slightly upward, looking toward a tiny hole drilled into the wooden trim above the barn door. Inside that hole, completely invisible to the naked eye, was a high-definition, military-grade pinhole lens capturing every single syllable, every micro-expression of rage, and the undeniable image of a law enforcement officer threatening an unarmed senior citizen with an unholstered weapon. "Are you sure about that, Thomas?" Arthur asked softly. Miller frowned, momentarily thrown off by the lack of fear in the old man's voice. Before the sheriff could respond, Arthur took a step backward into the barn, pulling a small black device from his pocket. It looked like an old garage door opener, but when he pressed the button, a loud hum echoed through the building. Suddenly, the overhead lights in the barn flickered to life, powered by the battery bank. But more importantly, a large flat-screen monitor mounted on the back wall, previously hidden behind a canvas tarp, illuminated with a blinding glare. Miller and Deputy Vance squinted against the sudden light. When Miller's eyes adjusted to the screen, the color instantly drained from his face. The monitor wasn't showing a television broadcast. It was displaying a highly organized, split-screen matrix of digital documents, bank statements, and live video feeds. In the upper left quadrant, a spreadsheet detailed exact dates, dollar amounts, and wire transfer numbers linking Sheriff Thomas Miller's offshore shell company to Apex Holdings. In the upper right quadrant, an audio file wave format was playing on a loop, muted but clearly labeled, Miller Apex Call Transcript, Land Acquisition Strategy. But it was the bottom half of the screen that made the sheriff's breath hitch in his throat. It was a live streaming dashboard, showing that the audio and video currently being recorded by the pinhole camera above the door was being broadcast directly to an external server. A digital counter in the corner showed the file was being uploaded in real time to the State Attorney General's Integrity Unit, the Federal Bureau's regional office, and 3 major investigative journalism outlets in the state capital. Arthur looked at the horrified sheriff and smiled for the first time in months. "I didn't spend 50 years just farming, Thomas. I spent 20 of them managing secure data networks for the Department of Defense. You brought a gun to a data war." The silence inside the barn was heavy, broken only by the low, rhythmic hum of the server stack hidden beneath Arthur's workbench. Sheriff Miller stood frozen, his chrome revolver still raised, but his arm had begun to tremble. The absolute certainty of his power had evaporated in a single fraction of a second. He stared at the glowing monitor, watching the digital upload progress bar tick upward, 84%, 85%, 86%. "You're bluffing," Deputy Vance stammered, his hand instinctively dropping to his own holster. Though his voice lacked any real conviction. "You're an old man living in a shack. You don't have this kind of access." "Check your phone, Deputy," Arthur said smoothly, never taking his eyes off the sheriff. "If your department's internal network is as secure as you think it is, you should be getting an automated alert right about now." As if on cue, the heavy-duty police radio clipped to Miller's shoulder crackled to life with a burst of static. The voice of the main dispatcher, usually calm and dismissive, sounded panicked, frantic, and entirely unraveled. "Sheriff? Sheriff, come in, do you copy?" the radio blared. "We've got a major situation at the station. The main terminal just locked us out. There's a data breach protocol running on the county servers, and, oh my God, Thomas, it's broadcasting our internal ledger. The encrypted files from the asset forfeiture account are dumping onto the public domain." Miller's hand dropped. The revolver felt suddenly heavy, like a piece of useless lead. He realized with a sickening jolt that Arthur hadn't just targeted the interaction happening in this barn. The old man had used his deep technical knowledge to infiltrate the entire, poorly secured digital infrastructure of the Blackwood County Sheriff's Department. For over a decade, Miller had used the department's asset forfeiture fund as a personal piggy bank, seizing cash from travelers passing through the highway corridors under the guise of drug interdiction, then routing those funds into private accounts. It was a flawless system because nobody ever had the resources to fight the county court system. But now, every redacted line, every hidden transaction, and every falsified police report was being unmasked and distributed globally. "Turn it off, Arthur," Miller said, his voice dropping its aggressive edge, replaced by a desperate, strained negotiation tone. "We can talk about this. We can make a deal. Whatever Apex offered you, I can triple it. You want the farm? You keep the farm. You want this county to leave you alone. You'll never see a squad car within 5 miles of this road again. Just cut the feed." Arthur wiped his hands on his rag again, his expression entirely unreadable. "It's not a live feed I can just switch off with a remote, Thomas. It's a decentralized encryption block. Once the sequence starts, it requires verification codes from 3 separate external nodes to abort. And those nodes are currently being monitored by federal oversight servers in the Capitol." The progress bar on the main monitor hit 99%, paused for a heartbeat, and then flashed a bright, undeniable green text, "Upload complete. Secure broadcast successful." Deputy Vance backed away toward the barn door, his eyes wide with fear. He was young, he had a whole life ahead of him, and he suddenly realized he was standing next to a sinking ship. "Sheriff, we gotta get out of here. If the feds are looking at this right now, they're already pulling tracking data from our cruisers." Miller didn't move. The realization of his total ruin was paralyzing. His house, his bank accounts, his reputation, his absolute control over the county, everything he had spent a lifetime building through fear and intimidation was dismantled by a man he had dismissed as a helpless victim. "You think you won, old man?" Miller whispered, a final, dangerous spark of desperation flaring in his eyes. "Even if they come for me, you're still stuck in this valley. You think the people I do business with are just going to let you sit here after you ruined a multi-million-dollar land deal?" "I'm 72 years old, Thomas," Arthur replied, his voice echoing with the quiet dignity of a man who had already faced the worst losses life could offer. "I buried my wife 3 years ago. I've lived my life, and I've kept my honor. You traded yours away a long time ago for a corporate paycheck. I'm not afraid of what comes next. But you should be." Suddenly, the true nature of the trap revealed itself. This wasn't a desperate defense of a 72-year-old man trying to protect his 80 acres of agricultural land from corporate developers. The land dispute wasn't the problem, it was the bait. Arthur had intentionally allowed himself to look vulnerable, drawing Miller out into the open, forcing the sheriff to use his most corrupt tactics, just to get him into this exact barn, under this exact camera lens. "You didn't do this for the farm," Miller whispered, his voice completely hollow as the first state police cruiser skidded to a halt outside the barn doors, its red and blue light strobing violently across the wooden beams. Arthur didn't say a word. He merely reached over to his workbench, picked up an old, dust-covered cassette tape player, and pressed play. A voice began to speak through the small speaker, a voice Miller hadn't heard in over 27 years, a voice that belonged to a young girl crying out for help, followed immediately by the unmistakable, younger voice of Thomas Miller giving an order to cover something up in the deep woods. The sheriff's heart stopped. The financial fraud charges, the corporate bribery, the asset forfeiture scandal, those were just the public-facing crimes Arthur used to ensure the federal authorities would deploy instantly. The real secret, the dark, horrifying truth that Miller had buried deep in the Blackwood County soil nearly 3 decades ago, was finally coming to light. And the feds were already stepping out of their vehicles with federal warrants that extended far beyond white-collar crime. But as the heavy footsteps of federal agents echoed on the gravel outside, approaching the entrance with weapons drawn, a final, terrifying realization hit Miller. The digital upload hadn't just gone to the Attorney General and the news outlets. It had been programmed to release a second, fully decrypted master file to a highly specific Anonymous public forum if Arthur Vance didn't enter a live biometric passcode within the next 5 minutes. A file that didn't just contain Miller's crimes, but the names of every single high-ranking state official, judge, and politician who had taken a payout from the Blackwood County network since the turn of the century. If that file went live, it wouldn't just ruin a corrupt local sheriff, it would completely collapse the entire political infrastructure of the state. Arthur looked down at his watch as the digital timer on the screen began its final, rapid countdown, 4 minutes, 59 seconds. The federal agents burst through the door, shouting commands, but Miller wasn't looking at their weapons. He was looking at Arthur's thumb hovering just a fraction of an inch above the biometric scanner. The old farmer had the power to stop the total exposure of an entire state's corruption network, or he could let the timer hit 0 and unleash absolute chaos. The choice was entirely his, and the clock was ticking. The tension inside that old, dusty barn didn't just peak, it shattered the very foundation of everyone standing within its walls. Think about the sheer weight of what Arthur Vance was holding in the palm of his hand. Imagine the psychological shift, a man who was targeted as a weak, helpless victim turning out to be the ultimate architect of a corrupt empire's downfall. This is the exact moment where the line between justice and total, unbridled chaos blurs. If you were standing in Arthur's worn-out work boots, with the timer ticking down from those final, agonizing seconds, what would you have done? Would you have pressed that biometric scanner, accepted the arrest of the sheriff, and kept the rest of the names hidden to maintain some semblance of stability? Or would you have let the timer hit absolute 0, letting the master file drop like a nuclear warhead on the state's entire political landscape, knowing the collateral damage would be massive? Let me know in the comments right now, would you have stopped the timer, or would you have let it all burn? Type burn or stop down below. I want to see how many of you would choose absolute exposure over calculated justice. Because what Arthur did next defied every single expectation of the federal agents who had just breached the perimeter. He didn't look at the tactical gear, he didn't look at the weapons pointed at his chest, and he certainly didn't look at the weeping, broken sheriff who was now dropping to his knees on the gravel floor. Arthur simply looked at the digital clock as it hit the final 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. He never pressed the scanner. He let it hit 0. The screen flashed a single, definitive phrase, broadcast sent. Within milliseconds, thousands of encrypted servers across the country received the unredacted truth. The shockwave was instantaneous. It wasn't just a local news story anymore, it was the lead headline across every global media network within an hour. The dark secret of Blackwood County wasn't just exposed, it was completely annihilated, ensuring that no one, from the local deputy to the highest-ranking politician in the capital, could ever hide from what they had done to the innocent people of that valley. This incredible story of a quiet farmer who used his hidden brilliance to completely outsmart a corrupt system is a powerful reminder that you should never judge a book by its cover, and you should never underestimate a man with nothing left to lose. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat and you want to see more deep-dive investigations, jaw-dropping twin plots, and stories where the underdog completely flips the script on the corrupt and powerful, do not wait another second. Hit that subscribe button right now, turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload, and smash the like button to help this video break through the algorithm so more people can see justice being served. If you loved the intense psychological chess match in this video, you are absolutely going to love our next story. It's appearing on your screen right now. Click it immediately to find out what happened when an arrogant billionaire tried to illegally evict an entire community, only to realize the town's quietest resident was a retired Black Ops intelligence officer. Click that video right now, and I will see you over there.